here from 2009 until 2016. At that time with the IFC and the World Bank Group. This afternoon we have, I think, a very thought-provoking discussion around trends from joint liability group, the JLG approach, towards more individual lending. And we have a terrific panel, some very deep experience with these gentlemen all around me. And let me introduce with no further ado. But just to remember that all of the profiles are on the app for the summit. And so what I'll be doing is just one or two sentences with the titles for these gentlemen. In terms of perspectives, I want to just mention that we have, just to trigger the discussion, an excellent study, a very detailed, data-driven study from CRIF, obviously leading credit bureau in the country, as well as from Ujivan as a small finance bank perspective, Fusion is an MFI NBFC perspective, Axis Bank, of course, a leading commercial bank, and via FinServe with the new fintech approach that we're seeing explosive growth in the sector. So let me start. Immediate to my left is Vibhas Chandra, who brings over 11 years of experience in financial inclusion. He's representing Ujivan, Small Finance Bank Limited. Ujivan, of course, was an urban NBFC MFI for about 11 years before transitioning and receiving their small banking license in 2015. And Ujivan is serving over 5 million clients. To his left is Raul Robello, who's head of rural lending for financial inclusion, which includes micro-lending with Axis Bank. And his department is operating in 18 states across the country and serving 2 million people. Immediately, all the way over to my right is Shubho Chattopadhyay, who's the country sales head for the Credit Bureau Analytics and Software for CRIF. And he's bringing over 16 years of experience, 9 of them with CRIF, and a key contributor to the report for the Aditya Puri committee that was set up by the RBI, looking at credit bureau operations overall back in 2014, and is a lead on this report as well. So we're very much looking forward to hearing his analysis. And we have Devesh Sachdev, who's the founder and CEO of Fusion Microfinance, a leading MFI serving 1.8 million clients and operating across 18 states, assets under management of more than 500 million USD. And last but not least, immediately to my right, is Jagadish Ramadugu, who's the co-founder and CEO of Via FinServe, which is already a 5-year-old fully assisted digital microfinance platform, serving nearly 750,000 clients and asset under management of over 200 million USD. So we have significant experience with the gentlemen on this panel, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing their perspectives. So just in terms of setting the context, and I don't want to take away any of the thunder from Shubho in terms of the data in the study, but clearly over the last, I'd say more than 5 years across India, we're seeing an evolution from group lending, and especially the joint liability model that is very prevalent across the country, to more individual lending. And this is not new globally. In fact, in the 90s, we started seeing this, especially in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, in Latin America, especially in urban lending. And in the 2000s, we started to see the group lending model starting to really fray and break apart, even in Sub-Saharan Africa, across the Middle East, North Africa. The group lending model still persists. It's still very deep, I think, here in India, next door in Bangladesh, and in some countries in East Asia, where I've been most recently based in Hanoi. We still see a lot across East Asia and in the Pacific. And it's a bit of a conundrum to me, actually. If I were given a choice between being in a group to access a loan and being responsible for these 5 gentlemen's debts on top of my own versus having, direct access to a loan or to financial services, that would be a very easy choice. But obviously, a lot of the clients that we serve don't necessarily have that choice. But it's interesting to me how long the group lending model is. It's very deep here in India, and I think it's interesting how these trends are now starting to move. And of course, through the fintechs and through the tremendous competition in the financial sector, we're starting to see institutions looking at this again. And obviously, for individual lending, it really does involve a change to operations for financial service providers. Instead of the group model and group confidence and trust and social collateral, much more use of cash flow analysis, of use of collateral, use of credit scores, as we're seeing operations evolving. In terms of the regulatory perspective, of course, the RBI allows a maximum cap, as I understand it, of 15% on individual lending. And that's something that I want to get to in the discussion, how people feel about the policy and regulatory changes that may be needed given a shift or an evolution. And finally, I think, as we're seeing so much competition in our sector across the financial services market, the institutions that are able to really reach clients and provide differentiated services, well-tailored products, and that includes obviously an individual touch. Those are the institutions that will attract clients and be able to grow. So I think this topic is incredibly timely at this point of evolution of the sector. What we do have, as Kirti mentioned, we do have 2 questions in the app. I'm going to save that for just a bit, but first I want to turn to Shubho. Looking forward to a very data-intense and fact-based analysis of trends in the sector, moving from JLG towards more individual lending. Over to you.
It's a data-intense presentation, so my request is keep the focus on the messages in the slide and the graphs in the slide. That's what we are here to focus on. So let's just start by looking at microfinance over 3 years. So it's nearly a 2 lakh crore portfolio, the JLG portfolio, with a very strong growth rate. The new book has normalized to a par that is acceptable. We have about 6 crores or 60 million customers that are actively servicing the JLG group. That, from a denominator standpoint, is phenomenal. So, what is actually the number of people from the 60 million today having bought microfinance? That number is now more than 11 million. And that rate, as Jennifer was saying, has been growing significantly. But very interestingly, now more than ever before, borrowers with vintage of less than 12 months are getting access to non-microfinance loans. If in the last 12 months, 100 people have become first-time microfinance borrowers, within the first 12 months, 44 of them have gotten access to a non-microfinance loan. That is a phenomenal number. I mean, I don't know if it's a positive or a negative, but the number itself is a material number to monitor at least over the medium term. The first corollary question that obviously arises is that when a borrower who is used to borrowing in the group model, when they borrow in an individual model, does it impact the group delinquency? The answer to that, the data is saying, is no. So the cohort that is pure JLG borrowers, which is 60 million minus 11 million, has a very similar delinquency and roll forward rate to the 11 million who have a microfinance and a non-microfinance in the individual capacity on the microfinance loan. However, at a borrower level, stress begins to come. So, in 2017, if there were 100 districts in India with significant microfinance portfolio and significant non-microfinance lending in them, in nearly 2/3 of them, the worst delinquency on any loan by a borrower was 0 days. In 2019, the number of such districts has dropped to 57. And 4 of those districts have today a worse delinquency of greater than 90 days. So the first thing that stands out is microfinance pool is okay, but residual risk is increasing. That's the first takeaway we have from this. What kind of products gets given? We know that the traditional view has been to give secure products, which is housing, but increasingly we are seeing an increase in the number of small ticket loans being given out. The personal loans, the auto loans of the world. Okay. We are also seeing an increase in asset-backed finance. The traditional view of expansion into asset-backed finance was gold. Now we are also seeing commercial vehicles come into play. So the question really, I think the first question that we try to answer therefore is, does doing more of lesser ticket loans, is it a better risk mitigation strategy on this base? And the second is, what is the opportunity size for NBFC MFIs? Basis the 15% cap. So if you look at the NBFC MFI portfolio today and extrapolate that 15%, that additional opportunity is 8,000 crores. That is the size of the opportunity. Let's hold the risk question for now. What are the products, and is there a difference in the products that are being offered basis geographies in India? Because the microfinance population in multiple states are at different vintages. So if you look at the top vintage states, the Tamil Nadus of the world, the Karnatakas of the world, larger push on gold loans, absolutely expected. Because the gold loan market is actually dominated in the south of India, right? If you now look at states which are the Maharashtras of the world where urban credit is so significant, you see an extrapolation of that because you see housing play a very big role in the Maharashtra. But you also see the same trend coming in MP, which is a lesser vintage microfinance state with a much more rural profile. The third thing that you see is Rajasthan, which is absolutely standing out in terms of the cross-sell in terms of business lending, which is actually telling me that there is a supplier play here who understands this market and is saying that I actually have the wherewithal in terms of underwriting, in terms of collections, in terms of my knowledge of the customer to do business loans as a hypothesis. Obviously, the risk story will say whether that hypothesis is holding or not. So what is the risk profile looking like? Gold loan also. States with similar vintage, slightly different results. Is the Maharashtra experiment working? Is the MP experiment working? The answer till now is not definitive. Because we are seeing slightly higher NPAs there, but we will have to wait for its seasoning. But look at what's happening in Rajasthan. They have controlled the NPAs on business loans. So this, at least I am convinced, is a case where there is a supplier who knows how to do this and is actually playing to its strength. And I don't think it can ever be a pan-India supplier who is showing this performance in one state and is not showing this performance in another state. The other important aspect is, if you look at it, the evolution of microfinance was largely rural, then it pivoted to a point in time where it was more urban and less rural, and then it has gone back to being more rural and relatively lesser urban. So the third angle to look at is the cross-sell urban specific or is the cross-sell rural specific? So if you now look at it, Tamil Nadu cross-sell is absolutely location agnostic. Strong urban portfolio, strong rural portfolio, strong cross-sell on urban, strong cross-sell on rural. Look at the states of West Bengal and Bihar. Very large borrower bases. Post demonetization, Bihar and Orissa are the two states that have grown significantly in terms of the JLG portfolio. Very strong borrower bases, pretty strong rural bases, but look at the graph on the right and you will see the difference in the cross-sell that's happened on that base relative to Tamil Nadu, which from a borrower base standpoint is a very similar base. Then you come to Karnataka and Maharashtra, which from an urban-rural microfinance borrower base is very similar. But from a cross-sell are showing two different stories in terms of Maharashtra being more urban cross-sell and Karnataka being less urban cross-sell. Now a very important aspect. We spoke about the fact that cross-sell on first-time MFI borrowers has increased more than ever. So the question is the last slide similar on the overall cohort and to the first-time borrower? So the answer to that is across states. Cross-sell on first-time MFI borrowers is higher than the cross-sell on borrowers who have had multiple vintages. That is what the data is saying. Okay, I will skip these because these are incident. The next thing to look at is to say, is there a difference in the cross-sell pattern based on who is the supplier of MFI credit? So the inference really is, if you have been lent an MFI loan by an SFB and if you are an urban customer of an SFB, the chances that you are getting cross-sold is higher. So because of this story, the next thing to really look at is there really therefore a difference in the product profile and the supplier profile of customers whose microfinance loan is coming from a small finance bank, whose microfinance loan is coming from an NBFC MFI, and whose microfinance loan is coming from a bank? Now, when we looked at this, we found that the NBFC MFI customer was essentially indifferent. But there were different patterns emerging if you borrowed a microfinance loan from a small finance bank and if you borrowed a microfinance loan from a bank. So let us take the bank aspect first and we'll look at it purely from two aspects. One is the supply, the other is the risk. The first thing to look at is banks have a material customer base who have borrowed microfinance only from banks. So on that customer base, the products that are being sold or the products that they are migrating to are the traditional bank products. But the moment you have a borrower who has borrowed from a bank but also has an NBFC MFI relationship, the eyes through which the supplier of the cross-sell is looking at that borrower is completely changing. So the moment you have an NBFC MFI relationship associated with a bank borrower, your cross-sell profile changes. The bank product is PSL Agri, the NBFC product is gold loan, The NBFC product is personal loan, the NBFC product is two-wheeler loan. And that differentiation, that discrimination is coming because we think that the bank relationship is the second relationship and not the first relationship. The NBFC MFI is the first relationship, therefore the vintaging is more and therefore it is being looked at through a completely different lens by any supplier attacking this customer. Okay, this is so. From a risk angle, what does it show? For borrowers who are solely with banks, housing loans, business loans show relatively lower risk. Part of it is due to the product construct, much more long-term product. Seasoning, peak delinquency happens at a much later stage. But this is only possible because the banks have a material base that is only the bank MFI borrower. For borrowers who have a bank relationship and an NBFC MFI relationship and any other relationship that may matter, that is, that really doesn't matter. The bank relationship and the NBFC MFI relationship. Risk in personal loans is lower, but risk in personal loans has increased in the last 12 months. Two-wheeler delinquencies have more than doubled in the last 24 months. So therefore, the thing to look at is this profile, is this behavior very different if we now consider a SFB customer. The first point that is different between the bank profile and the SFB profile is that the SFBs have a much less material borrower percentage who are sole SFB borrowers. The banks have a larger base that are sole bank borrowers of microfinance. The SFBs have a much lesser base of sole microfinance borrowing from SFB. The SFB borrower has a much stronger overlap, and that overlap is with the NBFC MFIs. That overlap in this case is also with the NBFCs who have microfinance as a business. So the cohort or the population set is not homogeneous, and consequently the supply set is also not homogeneous. You remember on the bank side for NBFC and MFI you had gold, personal, two-wheeler and one more product, right? On the SFB base, over here you have gold loan and business loan, which was not there in the earlier cohort. Maybe the view that is coming that you can give a business loan is because this customer is an SFB customer and therefore has a much formalized deposit behavior. But there is a differentiation in the way suppliers are looking at these. In terms of delinquency, let's look at whether the stories are the same. Of course, housing loans and business loans show lower risk, product construct, vintaging, all of that. PSL Agri is a very high risk, not necessarily due to credit factors, but because of other factors. And it's a high risk irrespective of who originated the MFI customer. Excuse me. Two-wheeler delinquencies are also high. And we believe that the two-wheeler delinquency is high across the bank profile, across the small finance bank profile, because there is a sub-optimization in the timing of the cross-sell. These are not people who are buying super bikes. These are people who are buying bikes essentially for forward integration into their supply chain. In this model, there is no reason that your delinquency should increase by twice in 24 months if you time the cross-sell well, if you underwrite well, and if you have good recourse to repossession. It's a process sub-optimization that is leading to the increased delinquency, and not one of which is credit. So in terms of summaries, 18% of the active microfinance base today has a non-microfinance loan, or what we traditionally call as a traditional retail asset. This percentage is increasing in microfinance borrowers with less than 12-month microfinance vintage. That is the segment that is increasing more, and that is why I talk about the question of timing on the two-wheeler process. It does not at this point necessarily impact portfolio delinquencies on the microfinance loan. However, it increases delinquencies at borrower levels, as is seen by the fact that nearly 9% districts in India today exhibit a worse delinquency on this pool than 12 months ago. It carries a strong rural-urban divide in certain states. We saw the example of Maharashtra, we saw the example of Maharashtra versus Karnataka. The microfinance distribution between rural and urban, and the cross-sell distribution between rural and urban, is not necessarily a linear progression. And that is a fundamental construct. It is supplied by different suppliers. The demand articulation may be imperfect, but suppliers are not looking at that base as homogeneous people. And that is the reason why the product mix is different. That is the reason why you also see the delinquency mix being different in certain states. Thank you.
Terrific, Shubho. So this is a lot of data to absorb, and I'm glad you suggested we focus on the headlines here, which I think you've done a good job of teasing out. So my first question within the panel, and let me refer you all now as well to the app. I'd like to hear from the audience through the app, and please vote if you generally agree with the trends that Shubho is teasing out here and presenting, or if you see something different as trends emerging in the industry. And I'm going to be asking each of our panelists as well. So feel free to look at the app and make your choice. And I think Kirti's going to show us the results here in a minute. But my first question for Shubho. So in terms of the shift from, or the evolution, I guess, the mixing of the waters between JLG and individual lending, how much of this do you see for consumptive purposes, around, well, it's an argument over what is consumption versus non-consumption, but broadly, what do you see? Is it more towards consumption? Is it more towards small business activity? You talked a little about this in the case of Rajasthan, but just more broadly. And second is, how quickly do you see this shift evolving?
So, I think the pace of the shift from production to consumption, that pace has accelerated in the last few months. And that is evident in the increase in the number of small ticket loans that these people are getting. So you see an increase in the number of personal loans being given out. You see an increase in the number of consumer durables being given out. Not so much on the card side. You see an increase in the number of auto loans. You see an increase in the number of two-wheelers. Whereas earlier, if you really needed to look at this distribution, you would generally get gold, priority sector, agri and business loans. And then you would get an affordable housing loan or a home improvement loan. But so from a portfolio standpoint, these are still the large distributions. From a volume standpoint, the volume of new sanctions being contributed by the personal loans, that volume has increased. And I think in some form that is reflecting also in the fact that you had 66 districts, which was 0 days past due, microfinance, 0 days past due consumer, and now you are down to 57. And that cannot come if
you are taking a home improvement loan. That cannot come if you are taking a small business loan. That is only coming because you are taking a little more consumption loan, and possibly that's where your stress is showing up.
Okay, terrific. So now I'm going to open it out to the rest of the panel and how you see this data and the high-level analysis that Shubho has presented. And why don't we start here on my right?
So, I think it raises more complex questions than answers here. So, I think you have to see some of the trends which we are talking about delinquency in the last few months. It also, we have to look at it from what we are hearing from GDP. So, is it linked to we had a study 2 days back also in Economic Times about how household expenses has gone down. Is it related to that? I think that is one we have to see. Other is that he's talking about, the study talks about overlap increasing in the clients which have a less than 12 months vintage. I don't know who are the suppliers there. So I think that's another. If on the one side, if I look at it, my first hypothesis was that maybe microfinance companies have worked on bringing some of these large population of this client in the credit bureau, and the credit history has been established. So now which is being leveraged by other suppliers. However, looking at how it is happening for less than 12 months vintage, so I don't know. I mean, who are the suppliers who are not even looking at the vintage of the even microfinance history. I am not too sure that whether this is coming from SMBs, because SMBs also trying to migrate or trying to diversify their service offerings by launching two-wheelers and other products. So how much is being contributed because of the SMB? I think coming back to our topic is that I am not too sure when we talk about moving from JLG to individuals. Normally, it was also related to the size of the loan. The people said that as the loan size increases, the EMI also changes. So it is not possible for others to give a group guarantee. That was the basic hypothesis for saying that after a certain loan size, it should move to individual loan. However, I look at it differently. I say, look, and especially these are the trends of PAR are very early. So these business loans and housing loans, long tenor, you don't know where it will end up. Should, as a microfinance company, look at it more as a fact that it's rather as a challenge to, do a personal loan, or stick to microfinance and stick to your basic and keep the sizes small, or are we talking about it? Look, even if you keep the sizes small, but change the model, move to a person. So I think it raises. This is my initial comment on this.
Yeah. So very intense data presentation, but there are some points that we will have to agree, and somewhere we probably differ based on what we see on the ground. There's absolutely no doubt that there's a lot of differentiated borrowing happening on the ground. The set of customers we deal with today have started looking at multi-products, as we can clearly see, business loans and housing loans and things like that. A lot of the loans that microfinance organizations give out are also used for those purposes and uses. We see customers who borrow from 2-3 microfinance companies and end up adding walls to their house or a roof to their house. So where they could have gone for a housing loan. So obviously there is very clearly there is a gap. There is a gap in the availability of individual loans on the ground. And the fact that you're already showing 18%, I think a lot of it is coming from small ticket loan sizes. So I would not be very sure whether consumer durable loans or mobile loans. It looks like very small ticket size loans. The large ticket size loans seem to be very small in number as a percentage of the daily. But my own gut feel, being traveled to the market, shows very clearly that at least 30-35% of the customers, obviously it varies depending upon the markets we're looking at, have very, very evolved needs.
right? They do have needs for education loans, they have needs for housing loans, they do have needs for two-wheeler loans. We see the way their behavior transpires is very different because of the lack of availability of the loans. Most of the rural, the target segment that we obviously are looking at is microfinance target segment. They do end up buying a used two-wheeler because they don't get two-wheeler finance to that extent as what some of the more better banked customers in urban areas look at. So they end up building houses in installments because they don't get housing loans. So obviously there is a huge need, nobody is denying that. Now the question is, organizations like us, we have seen the JLG model, super elegant, very customer friendly to a large extent, worked very well on the risk framework, meets all the cost parameters, both from capability perspective and also from a significant return on investment, so it has to attract capital. So the question is not whether it is JLG versus individual loans. I think JLG is there to stay. I don't think that's a model that we are pushing around. Whether it's outdated, but clearly as a practitioner of JLG loans, I see clearly that we need to start moving ahead into addressing these other needs. JLG may not be the right model for that. So as an organization, we are trying to see how we can innovate, how we can build in our own capability to address some of these needs.
So what I would like to say that the data that was just presented and the overlap percentage with the retail loans was about 18%, and that is there for our organization also. It is about 20%. And there is a good news in this, there is a bad news in this. The good news is that the customers and the percentage is not low, it is 20%, and it might go further up. We also add husband and family members into this. So these customers are those who are actually taking one more step toward getting more and more financially included, and that's the good news. So the whole purpose of us opening microfinance companies and serving these customers was to include these customers into financial, and then these customers are taking one more step. So that's a welcome news, and we should be happy about it. The problem is, and the issue is that these customers are taking this step without us, and that's the problem, because when we started and to provide financial services with JLG loan, and then if we don't have any product, when the customer grows, then your customer naturally will go to some other competitor, and some of these competitors even are those who we don't even consider as our competitors, and that's the problem. And that's why I feel that there is a need of different kind of differentiated product for such customers, and if it is the percentage is as high as 20%, 30%, we have to look at other products which we can design and sell to our customers. In India, if you see, we are doing microfinance business for last 20, 22 years, not more, and we all are selling same kind of product, similar vanilla product we are selling, and it is selling also. One of the reasons what I feel is that because this customer don't have any other option, and if the customer has option, they are going to some other organization. So I think this is a time when we should look at product which customer need. And if you see the presentation, there are various products that customers are today buying from others. So if they need it and they are buying from others, why not we also design some product which we can design under the legal and regulatory framework. This is what I think.
Thanks. I think Shubho, starters, very insightful stuff you've presented. While it's all database, so we can't argue with it, but we've seen over the period of 5 years since we've been doing microfinance that once customers cross a cycle, they naturally come and ask you for a home improvement loan, a dairy loan, a gold loan. So it's not a surprise that the overlap is increasing. And also the point that you made that specific lenders have specific cross-sell products. One observation I have to that is probably because if you look at, and I can speak for private sector banks, mostly the units are housed under the same outfit. So for example, a microfinance outfit would also have agri-PSL, would also have rural housing, would also have business loans. So I think that is a contributing factor because you'd have the same team or in the same vicinity, the same set of stakeholders who are probably providing literacy or financial counseling to these customers to upgrade themselves. So that's a point I think is an observation. Devesh, to your point, and it's surprising that the number of customers who have not completed even 12 months on a MFI bureau, you see a high tendency there. I would suspect these are mostly gold loans and two-wheeler loans, and I think even banks would be big participants there, because unlike an NBFC MFI who has visibility only on the MFI product, banks today have a lot of visibility on customers, on their DBT transactions, on AEPS transactions that they do, and we actually churn out scores that pre-approve customers. So I do think those customers who are 12-month customers could have probably had visibility basis their other transactions or their other transactions basis DBT, etc. So those are my initial comments.
Are we working? Okay, great. So terrific. I think we're starting to tease out some of the reactions and a sense of what might be behind some of these numbers. Kirti, do you want to flash up what we're hearing from the audience? Just in terms of agreement, disagreement, broadly. Obviously, these are broad brush. I don't know how this poll is going to work here. Let's get the numbers up. Nope. Okay, well, while you're working on that, let's go on. My second question then to each of the panel is, okay, so we're seeing a shift. We're seeing an evolution and more overlap of the JLG model with individual, and that's something that, again, that we're seeing well beyond India. It's a very natural evolution in a financial services market. But what about the challenges from an institutional perspective? Each of the gentlemen up here represents a different kind, a different legal structure of financial service provider. So from your perspective, running your organizations, what do you see as the challenges in rolling out individual lending? It is a very different operational model. And we've been referring to it a bit up here already around cross-sell, but it goes well beyond just cross-sell. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. And then we're also going, that's the second poll question we're going to be asking the audience, is what do you see as the challenges? And you have a number of choices to flag there in your choices. So let me turn it over. Shubho, do you want to take a crack on this question, or leave it to our okay, terrific.
So I think looking at the data and looking at the market, one, I believe the time is right to explore other product offerings. Because some people have tried in the past, some microfinance companies have tried in the past, but one, I could see that there was a data asymmetry, which is now improved. The data has improved, the digitization has helped, automation, your client understanding, your client vintage, and most importantly, I think microfinance companies, as we have seen in Latin America and other countries, if it really moves to individual lending, so we are doing future lending. So I think this is my combined talk that yes, the time is right. But looking at the challenges, I think the most importantly, the biggest challenge is that are you in a position to, as a microfinance company, leverage your existing infrastructure? I think that's a big question. I don't think microfinance, microfinance is more of an operating model. It's not a cash flow based credit assessment model. So, which is a very different animal. So, one, in my view, it will be like setting up a very different asset class. So you cannot leverage your people, you cannot leverage your own corporate experience for the last whatever years you are doing this business, and you have to build up a team, which is a very, very different this thing. So I think the biggest challenge is that as a corporate, as a company, you have always been doing a more of operating model, running an operating model, so you need to really shift that. The second point I believe is that buying from all the stakeholders. So your microfinance, the two things are, it's very mono product, cookie cutter kind of approach. The scaling is easy. You have a set operating cost, set metrics. But are your investors or your board members will be ready to really back you up as a corporate to shift? Because it will take time, the whole matrix go haywire, it will take some time. So I think that's second challenge, I believe. The third challenge is the cost. I think because you have a different cost matrix altogether. The whole cost paradigm changes. That's the next point from my side. I think risk management in microfinance, I still believe is slightly shallow, not at that level. So I have practitioners saying this. So I think, but in this model, you need to have very different risk management. Your IT platform, it's a complex lending, so you need a very different IT platform with a very very deep risk management and audit. So that changes. I think so. In a way, and the last thing is, I think what institutions like us we need to do is that do a laboratory test. I think we are tuned to a certain pace in microfinance, so we have to really come out of it and say, okay, I will do a pilot, I will do a lab test, and do a seasoning of 12 months, 18 months, because the delinquencies in this kind of products start showing after 12 months, unlike a microfinance, which is already in 12 to 16, 18 months kind of loan tenor. I think these are the challenges I think. So you need a very, very strong corporate commitment, and after that, you have to build up the whole building blocks to this kind of.
Devish went first. He's repeated most of the points that I wanted to say. So to the extent of to the risk of sounding repetitive, I will agree with a lot of points Devish said. But I think essentially, if I look at the whole challenge in moving from a JLG model to individual model, is actually moving from a mass standard product to a mass customized product. Now that's a big shift in terms of starting with the culture of the organization, right? A microfinance culture, organization culture is very, very straightforward, simple, repetitive, non-innovative, and a mass customized product requires high level of innovation, high level of responsiveness, high level of adaptability to new technologies, new platforms. So there is inherently a challenge of culture which we need to first address before even addressing some of the other challenges that Devish was talked about. Once you address the culture, and for example, an organization like us, we are trying to address the culture challenge with bringing in people from non-microfinance background, creating a separate division which has doesn't have microfinance responsibilities, but only focused on some of these new evolving product requirements. And very, very importantly, building capability is something which is not an easy journey, because not only the technology platform, but the whole people capability building, attracting talent into a different culture, into a different microfinance organization. So this capability building is a very, very big challenge that we will have to cross, and I think some organizations are already attempting that, and that's a challenge itself. But a larger challenge which I also find, Devesh talked about board, I'll also include investors and finances like banks. Like inherently, any new product that you come up is likely to be risky, at least in initial phases. So your most of the microfinance attracts a lot of growth capital because we already have crossed a model stage, and so we don't attract really risk capital. So how do you attract risk capital to allow you to innovate and do some of these disruptive experiments on the product side? And how do you ensure that banks also are willing to lend to an organization when you're trying to get into some of these evolving products? It's not easy. So I do think there are solutions, like for example the recent co-origination model, which looks like starting to take off. Some of the banks that we started showing interest, where you bring in the capabilities of the banks and your own capabilities of scale and customer connect and operational risk management. You try to evolve on joint products. We are looking at solutions like that to overcome.
I would like to agree with both of the earlier speakers that you have to keep all these things in mind when you are thinking of GL2 while graduation and having differentiated product in your company, in your organization. But at the same time, suppose these all challenges are not there, and then you decided to start GL2 program with differentiated product. Then also during the process of launch and rollout, you face some problem and issues, and that is what I would like to discuss. When you think about GL2 graduation, first problem is that we are basically a one single product company for a very long time. We are doing it for last 20-22 years, and that product also we have not designed. That product also someone else has designed and we are selling it. So basically we are not a product designer, and when it comes to individual lending, it is not a single product. You have to design many products as per local requirement, as per actual customer need. That is a problem. When you start GL2IL program. And the first problem that you face is segmentation of your customer. And that, which is very important. You do GL business, you know about your customer segment. There is no question about it. But once you go into IL, you have to find micro segment within your microfinance customer segment, and that's a problem. And that's where you have to invest a lot, work a lot on your data science. The good thing after Andhra crisis is that you have a lot of data around your customers which you can use it. But at the same time, in our industry, there is a lot of scope for improvement as far as data science is concerned and usage and consumption of data is concerned, which can be used to segment your customer well. This is the second point. And once this data is used and you design product as per your requirement based on geography, based on rural, urban, and other criteria, then also you will find that customers, product in one geography which is working very well will not work in some other geography which is very close to that place, but the customers are very different. We started our IL business in Ujjivan back in 2008 when this data was not there, but we started because of different purpose. Which might be some of the purposes still true. We saw that many customers after taking 2-3 cycles of loan are not interested in getting further loan because of many reasons. Don't want to attend center meeting, don't want to take group guarantee because the group dynamics changes or center dynamics changes with cycles because some customer goes out, some customer comes in, etc. Or customer wants higher ticket size loan which was not possible at that point of time in 2008-9 I think. The average industry ticket size was close to 10-12,000. So and at the same time, we also found that there are customers who are at the fence, don't want GL loan, at the same time not served by other banks also, a typical missing middle. So we thought that we should have a product for both category of customers, GL2IL, graduation as well as for open market customers as well. And we started IL program then. In the last 10 years, we have experimented a lot. We have tried a lot of models, same staff, different staff, same supervisor, different supervisor, independent credit, integrated credit, and many products, many features, etc. And today, in 10 years, and meanwhile, the other crisis happened, demonetization happened, and we were new in so we stopped, we paused, we restarted, etc. Today, we have about more than 2 lakh customers whom we have been able to graduate with about 1,200 crores of OSP and portfolio quality, which is not very different from GL. So in this learning, what we felt that when you start IL, first thing when you try to segment, you try to get inspired from others who are successful internationally or nationally, and you see international market, your legal and regulatory environment is very different. At the same time, might be the customers are also very different. So what works there may not work for you. And if you see nationally also, we all are working in microfinance segment, but at the same time, based on where you operate, your customers' demand or need will be very different. So as we were an urban microfinance company, and after converting to a bank, we are going to rural also, and we see a great opportunity there also. But at the same time, our older customers are in metro and urban, so the need of our customers might be very different from an organization who is rural centric. This is the second problem when you try to get product from other companies or other organizations, which might not work for you. From product development point of view, once you do segmentation, go into product, the one issue happens is that the logical extension of group loan, you think as the only logical extension is higher ticket size loan and individual loan. And that's right also up to a certain extent because customers want higher ticket size loan, and that is why customers are taking loan from multiple MFI or they are taking retail loan, etc. So there is a demand, but at the same time there are a lot of possibilities horizontally as well. So customers want lower ticket size loan but multiple times in a year. There is such example which we are not able to provide, and customers are getting more facilities like OD. So I would like to give an example. Most part of my career I have worked in the eastern part of the country, based out of Kolkata. In Kolkata, you will see the customers, who are into trade, their 30 to 40% business happens during the month of October and November. Why? Because there are a lot of festivals, including Durga Puja. But the demand of loans originates in the month of June only or May only, because the whole game is not on selling price; it's on cost price. Earlier, you buy, cheaper you get, and you are able to survive the competition. So, if you are, so that is why the loan is required in the month of June, whereas in traditional model, we will not be able to lend to all customers because it is cyclical. So this is the second challenge I think that we have to think that it is not only vertical, we have to think horizontal as well. And a third point I would like to mention, because GL loan is nothing, something which is where the credit is rules is very minimum. At the same time, the collection rule is also very minimum, because this collection thing is done by your customers only. They nudge each other, they remind each other, and your collection comes. Whereas when you come to IL, your customers are not going to help you. At the same time, you need a very strong credit framework so that you select customer well. The customers who actually deserve loan, at the same time the customers who can repay you. And second, you need to have a very good collection model as well, where you can nudge and inform your customer, because once you go into IL, customer will opt for many repayment method also. Maybe they will ask for ECS, electronic payment, they will ask for wallet payment, they can also ask for QR code payment, etc. And these might be very new for them. So they might require your help or reminder, etc., which will not happen through group, which is their group model. So I think these are the most important challenge that we will face once you plan to roll out tier 2 IL.
Terrific, and lots of heartfelt detail there as well, and clearly coming from experience.
Jagdish said he was at a disadvantage coming second. Imagine my plight. So I won't repeat a lot of relevant points there. I think one big challenge that I would call out is from my microfinance team is pure inertia, right? I mean, the JLG format is such a convenient format, both from lending as well as collection. So to basically shake up that inertia and go to individual lending, I think that's the first challenge. And then you talked about competencies of the team. But yeah, because you have a large team which also does individual lending, and by virtue of being in a bank, you've already mastered that trade of doing individual lending. I think the game is much easier and secured. Be it two-wheeler, be it gold loans, be it agri-PSL loan, that game I think banks are already at that customer segment also to an extent cover a distance. I think where we fall short is in unsecured, the ability to actually graduate a customer without having too much of other data points into an unsecured.
I think from our standpoint, I think the biggest challenge comes in saying what is the right credit score for this segment. Because this is a population, the underlying characteristics of which are very heterogeneous, as all of them have said. So what it necessarily means is that even if I build a scoring model that holds today, it is not necessary that the model will hold 12 months from now. Unlike, let's say, if you really build a model on credit cards or on two-wheelers, you know that it's going to hold for a certain period of time because you've seen that. So from our standpoint, I think the core challenge is for us to tell our customers that the credit score may not be the perfect solution. You need to look at something that is very custom to what is the segment you are trying to target. Who are the people like you who do this? And what are your end portfolio loss rates? So as an organization, it's very easy for us to go and say, okay, look at the credit score, look at the cutoff and do this. But the core challenge for us is to have that ability to get into that conversation that says the credit score is not necessarily the solution to this, but let's work on something that is custom and that both of us think will at least hold on the KPIs for a certain period.
So it's brave for someone from a credit bureau to say that a credit score may not be the only solution. So that's a lot of candor there. It's very helpful. So what we're seeing, we have 33 people who have voted. I know we have many more than that in the room. But it looks like broad agreement with what Tribot is presenting based on the CRIF data. I'd invite you to look at the second poll question as well, which is very much okay, and many people have already been voting. Okay, great. And please, if you'd like to pitch in and vote while we're discussing, would love to hear your thoughts on this as well. But looks like a very broad majority on revising internal procedures and lending criteria, which is definite. And as well as these other aspects. So would love to have more votes and get more views from across the audience. And while we do that, I'd also like to turn it out to you now to ask any questions that you would like answered from the panelists. And I believe we have some mics in the room. So just put up your hand, and our colleagues will come around with a mic, and please address your question.
Hi, I'm Nidhi from Kamal FinCap, and it's been a very interesting discussion here. So while we all agree that microfinance as a set model works in all corners of the geography of the country, the same is not true for individual lending, either when we are migrating the customer or talking about different type of products. So my question is, for many of us who are practitioners of microfinance, how do we make that leap? You know, we talked about different data points, we talked about the inertia of the team from a cookie cutter model to, so how do you make that point, you know? There doesn't seem to be any set solution. And like somebody said that we've tried different things, you know, different geographies have different festival dates, different needs. So is this like a try and attempt model, or can a microfinance institution look at individual lending as a stepping stone into, you know, different products?
Let's take a couple of questions, if there are, and then we'll.
So my question is like so we have heard of different challenges from JLG to the individual lending. Is there any challenges emanating from a JLG staff having a not graduating customer to the individual lending? So competency of the staff is one thing, but there is a kind of resistance to the group lending staff in not graduating the customer to individual loan, and not necessarily good quality customer is being pushed to the for individual lending. They may have something in play where they want to move the troublesome person from the group to the individual lending. Was there anything like that?
Okay. Is there one more question, please?
Are there any innovative collaterals which you have tried? Because, you know, traditionally the group was the collateral, and then when you move to individual lending, are there some innovations there which you have tried, which you could share?
Maybe one more question? Okay, then we'll take this round first. So a question kind of the fundamentals, how do you dive into this, and is it trial and error, or how do you start making this shift? About, do you pass off all the bad group clients to individual, or is there resistance from staff around that? And then third is in terms of innovative types of collateral, and what trends you're seeing there. Who wants to take, should we just make a round? Yeah.
I would like to answer the first one. So, I think what you can look at is that you can look at both secondary data and your own data. One, you can look at your own customer behavior and where there is a demand for a higher loans. Also look at the data of other asset class, how the other asset class is behaving. Like there's clearly, there are some southern states where business loans are doing very well. So I think just to be, not to be slightly reducing risk, it would be good to really see the data and then decide your strategy that, okay, my first pilot or my first experiment would be some of these pockets. So I think both your secondary data which is available, you can look at credit bureau data, you can take the credit bureau data for different asset class, look at the asset class, how it has behaved in different districts, different states, and then look at your data. You can do some field survey where you can understand that from which area, from your operating area, you're getting demands for a higher loans. Mix it with the data which is with the credit bureau and other population data. You can look at the state GDP. So all these things I think have to be. It is not a one single data you can decide. I think you have to really put everything together and then try to come out with some science on it.
So yeah, any change can happen either through innovation or disruption. So we all, as a sector, learned very quickly how to do cashless disbursement after the demonetization. So
I guess it's just either we slowly innovate and learn from each other, or we see some disruption which will force us to go the individual way. But as an organization, for example, we had the same issue 2 years back. So we started being very clear that we're going to graduate to individual loans over a period of time. So we started investing in technology, understanding data of each customer. We retain every bit of transaction data that we have with the customer, including credit bureau data. We have huge amount of demographic data of the customer, including how many rooms does this house have? Does it have a TV? Does it have a mobile phone? How many adults working in the house? We capture some information like that from all of the customers. And also, over the last 2 years, we have been staying away from customers who are not likely to graduate into individual loans. So, in the JLG model itself, I am sort of pre-selecting customers who tomorrow could graduate into individual loans. So, we are following a slightly different style. But essentially, as we start launching our individual products, we also don't try and do it nationally. We intend to do it in very, very select geographies, semi-urban, very select geographic states. We don't want to be giving choice of you. If you're operating in the JLG model in 6 states, you may not want to do it in all 6 states. We want to do it in one state, and within that state, selected district, selected mofusils/suburban area. That's what we're looking at. And very, very narrow product definitions. Obviously, we can't. We need to have simple products to start with, longer tenure loans, risk-weighted interest rates. So the way you define your product, the way you define a process, that's the area where I think we need to really put on efforts and work on. I don't think it is rocket science. The customer ultimately is the same. When we talk to the customer, more we understand really what they need. If we can translate that into a product and a process, I think that's.
Question I remember someone asked me in 2013 also this question, one of my employee, that IL is something where the ticket size is higher. At that point of time we had higher ticket size loans in IL, and your customer asks you only 2 questions: kab milega and kitna milega, how much and when. So if it is win-win situation, why IL is not working? And same question you are also asking today. So yeah, see. One thing is that we have not been, as an industry, we have not been able to design product as per customer requirement and keeping customer at center. The only logical extension that we have been able to find out from GL is higher ticket size loan, which is kind of individual in nature, and that's where we have actually failed to meet customer requirement. Whereas the customer requirement is very different and it changes every 100 kilometers. So ultimately, we have to reach a level where your product is so flexible that your customers are able to decide upon the feature of the product. So a customer which suits a loan which suits a customer may not suit his neighbor. So ultimately you have to reach at a level where your product is very flexible. It will take some time, but we have to work towards it, and that's when it will work as far as individual lending is concerned. And the question you asked is actually related to this, because IL, whatever we have done so far, one reason why it has not worked, not because your customer don't want it, it is because one of the important reason is your staff don't want to sell it. Not because they don't want to sell it. They are, the kind of single product company we are working for last many years. Your staff are, typically, sold only one product, and whenever there is a new product that comes in, whether it is a difficult product or not, if it is different, they are not able to sell it. So apart from training, etc., a lot of effort needs to be done in order to, make people understand why you are doing this and why you are selling this product, and make them, understand the vision behind launching new products. That I think is very important, apart from general training, retraining, etc. And coming to your question, ma'am, so far we have not tried any alternative collateral.
I think fundamentally all lenders want to make that shift from treating a JLG customer as an account to a relationship. You want to make that shift, and unless you start looking at more data points, probably in a bank we are in a privileged position to look at some of these customers over here, look at their transacting data, look at the kind of microinsurance they're buying, etc., to make a call for them to move we have 6 months back launched an individual lending product. Very early days for me to make comments about it, but yes, as I said, we have some of the data points to take those calls. To your question about whether I think collateral has been used, I don't know whether anybody has. We haven't, but I think there is room for us to look at that. I think some NBFCs have done very smart play, and to your point, see, it's not all about credit bureau score, you're right. You've got to get thick into those livelihoods. You've got to understand, send your credit guys actually, they're the risk guys out there to underwrite those customers, look at those enterprises, try to weave out cash flows from not documented income, and write a scorecard for those livelihoods. So I think that's the transition that we'll all have to make.
I think for anyone who's trying to do individual lending, the more valuable data is of the customer that you reject, not necessarily the customer that you accept. It is only when you reject that you learn to avoid bads. And unless you have enough bads in your portfolio, your models will not get you to the segment of one almost that all of them are talking about. So it's very important to not treat a rejected file. I'm not even talking of a rejected customer. It is very important mentally to not treat a rejected file as a cost. You must digitize that data because those are the variables, the livelihood variables, the kind of roof variables that allow you to discriminate. So I tell you one very rural focused NBFC, they have an application scorecard, and the variable that discriminates bad in that is whether the washing machine is a front load or a top load. Because the price of the detergent is different. If you are able to fill the detergent, you have a different cash flow. And it is not thought process that has got them there. It is that fundamental that I must look at a file and the people that I reject, and then I must arrive at what is helping me. And that is why I said that the credit score is not necessarily the most optimal solution.
Terrific. Okay. Well, some surprises, including the difference on clients owning a front load or a top load washing machine. But I'd like to wrap up in terms of, and please accept my my humble offer here of a summary. I think we've had a very rich panel and very clearly a lot of deep experience here, people who know what they're doing. But we've heard of 60 million clients currently in the country with the joint liability model, joint lending groups. Obviously a very proven model across India and still very much active in Asia and elsewhere, but we are seeing more individual lending evolving globally and have for a couple of decades now. It's obviously a very standardized approach, and it works. So I don't want to disparage the model, but we are also seeing an evolution in the market. Shubho presented data that 18% of these clients also have, the JLG clients also have an individual loan. And quite surprisingly, a concentration of clients who are less than 12 months as a JLG client are getting access to individual loans. He also mentioned, according to the CRIF data, that most of the institutions aren't yet hitting up at the 15% cap for individual loans as a part of their portfolio. So there's definitely room to grow. And we're hearing across the panel growth. We're hearing a number of approaches and going back even 10 years in the case of Ujjivan, who have been experimenting with this model. Clearly, individual loans and individual lending, it's a differentiated approach. It needs much better information, higher touch, client segmentation, and it's clearly a change in the relationship, an individual loan versus a joint group loan. And in terms of some of the changes we saw from the audience voting as well, but also from responses across the panel, clearly product design, cash flow, collateral, credit score, different approaches in making decisions about the credit allocation, staff training and incentives, but also buy-in is something, to make this change and to start doing the cross-sell or reaching out to different clients with a different product, an individual lending product that is probably more difficult, as well as changes to internal procedures, IT, portfolio management, risk management, marketing, collections. Several people mentioned the change in collections, and commitment from the board and investors. That this is a long-term shift and not to expect a quick win, and there may be some stumbling as institutions find their way and refine their products and understand the new risks that individual lending offers. So I hope that's a reasonable summary for the discussion that we've had, and I really want to thank our panel. I think we really do have tremendous experience from Shubho of CRIF, Devesh from Fusion, Jagdish from Avaya FinTech, and Vivas from Ujjivan, and Rahul from Axis Bank. So please join me in thanking them.
I take this opportunity to thank the panelists. I'd now like to request them to come forward for a group picture. Our special thanks to Dr. Jennifer Ison for driving this session interactively, and special thanks also to CRIF Highmark, our technical partner, for curating the session. We'll now break for tea and reconvene in the main hall for the next session on digital financial inclusion, truth versus hype.